we're back after this short break, or you're just clicking on part 2 on YouTube. Here with, Evan Glass, running for at-large, also lives nearby District 5, Silver Spring. It's a great place. So you were talking about your thought processes, the way you synthesize different arguments and opinions you hear from other people you listen to, because it's good to have someone that listens, doesn't just talk at you. And you wanted to share how you ended up acquiring this skill.
Sure. Well, so I'm a trained journalist and worked at CNN for 12 years and covered Capitol Hill, presidential campaigns, national politics, and I was able to translate those skills here in Montgomery County when I moved into downtown Silver Spring, and there were thousands of us who had just moved into a brand new neighborhood, South Silver Spring, where Denizens is. You probably know Denizens.
Yes.
Right? And thousands of us are walking to the metro in this new community, and the sidewalks were falling apart and there were no crosswalks along East-West Highway. And I thought to myself, I know how Congress works, I know how the federal government works, but I have no idea how to fix sidewalks here in Montgomery County. And I used my skills as a journalist to investigate and make phone calls and ask the right questions and talk to the right people. And then I advocated and we got sidewalks and crosswalks. And it was wonderful. And a few years later, about 2009, there was a brand new condo, a luxury condo that was supposed to come online on East-West Highway, and the market tanked. The real estate bubble burst. And then the housing fell apart. And so you had this structure with no one owning it or being foreclosed on and sold. And so for 1 year, I'm walking back and forth, and this building was dark, literally. And then a year later, neighbors of mine contacted me and said, Evan, we are hearing it's becoming affordable housing, and we're concerned. Members of the council in Rockville contacted me and said, Evan, your neighbors are getting concerned about this building becoming affordable housing, and we just want you to know about it.
As in they didn't want it to be?
That's correct.
They didn't want those people to...
That's correct. Yes. And so I didn't know anything about affordable housing, or at least what affordable housing meant here in Montgomery County. And so I picked up the phone and called a gentleman whose name is Rick Nelson, and Rick was head of the housing department for a long time. And I asked him, interviewed him, to tell me all about this project. He then gave me more people to speak to, who was owning it, who was managing it, who was managing the rentals. And I spoke to all those people. And then I wrote a blog post, put it on our community blog, emailed it out to thousands of my neighbors. And basically what I told them was, this is a building that is going to allow residents who make between 30 and 60% of the area median income live in our community. Do you know what the 30 to 60% of the area median income is?
I'm gonna guess it's not far from $30,000 to $60,000.
At the time, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So in this blog post, I said, who don't you want living in our neighborhood? You want someone right out of college or grad school? A single parent, a starting off teacher, or retiree? Who don't you want? Because I know that when I first got out of college, I wouldn't have even qualified because I wasn't even making that much money. That was CNN. But I shared this information with the community and told them why this was an important project. And so that when time came a few weeks later for our community meeting, and you can imagine a community meeting being very contentious about an issue like this, not one naysayer showed up. Because I had taken the time to learn about the issue myself, synthesize it, and then explain to people why it was so important to support them. And those are the skills that I will bring, fighting for what's right after learning about it myself and then being able to change hearts and minds. And it's the same skill set regarding marriage equality and some of these very tough issues. You can't berate someone, you can't yell at them and explain to them why it's the right thing. You gotta personalize it and share with them some real stories about why this is the best thing to do. And that's what I have a history of doing.
Yeah, I like how you kind of turned it on them to say, okay, who don't you want to live here? Instead of projecting the worst possible argument on them. And I find myself sometimes I'll admit, sometimes I troll a bit. I have some downtime at work, and Robin Ficker is on there. I still want to.
Do you troll under your real name, or do you have a pseudonym?
The MoCo Millennial.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I troll.
That is you. Okay.
Well, okay. I don't troll. I hyperbolize, if that's the word.
Okay.
It's more just out of.
You fight back.
Yeah. It's like I shouldn't, but whatever. Robin Ficker's on there, and I do want to have him on my show for legitimate reasons. I need a Republican. I need a voice of dissent. So where was I going with this? Yeah.
About style.
Yeah, to project the worst possible argument on people. Like, you could say, oh, you don't want affordable housing because you don't want immigrants to come in because you're racist. Maybe that's true of some, but it's on them to come forward and say, I don't want immigrants to live here. I don't want illegals to live here. And maybe that's not what they're thinking.
I think that's a really interesting way to frame it, because I never thought I'd be doing this, running for office in this way. I was encouraged to do it 4 years ago, but before that I was a journalist and I covered politics. And for me, it's all about being positive, about sharing your positive vision, what you want to do, who you want to help, and getting more people on board. Because ultimately, politics is the art of the possible, and you need a big coalition to get things done. So if you berate people and you put people down, you might have a base of people that support you, but you're probably not going to expand it. Mm-hmm. And as we know at the national level, the only way we got Obamacare and the only way we're going to get an immigration deal is by casting a wide net and bringing more people on board. And that's my style of politics.
Yeah, and at least within the Montgomery County Democratic Party, there can be a lot of drama. I took a day trip just out of town yesterday because I didn't want to deal with drama, political, work-related, personal, financial. I just took off and drove. But I think at the end of the day, most of us want the same thing. We're arguing about how you get there.
Right.
And I think that's where the listening and the synthesizing comes into play. Because it's not, if someone opposes a particular affordable housing bill or just a draft proposal, it's not because they hate poor people.
Right.
It's not because they don't want affordable housing. They just think that a different avenue might work.
And it was from that incident, quite frankly, that I learned about affordable housing here in Montgomery County. I learned how important it is and how strong a need there is, and learned about an organization called Montgomery Housing Partnership, which is the county's largest nonprofit developer of affordable housing. And through this process, self-realization process, I was asked to join the board, and I am now very proud to be the vice chair of that organization, helping create more affordable housing opportunities throughout the county, and recognizing what the need is and how great that need is, as you mentioned at the beginning. Right now there's a shortage of 50,000 units over the next 10 years, projected need for 50,000 units. I don't know where we would build them. I don't know how we would pay for them, but that statistic alone tells me that we need to do something better. And the law that helped create a lot of the affordable housing in the county, the moderately priced dwelling unit, that was created 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, most of the housing was single-family homes and townhouses. Nowadays, most of the housing is high-rise apartments. And while a condo might be deemed affordable under this program, the condo fee is not affordable. And so that tells me through this learning process that, again, we need to hit the refresh here. And a program that was created 45 years ago, I think, is due for some modernization. And it goes back to what we were just talking about in the first segment about looking at some of the policies in place and seeing how we can modernize and update them.
Yeah. Now tell me more about MPDUs, because I'm familiar with the concept, but I couldn't identify one. Like, I know what income bracket they're targeting, more or less. I've read up, whether or not, if I needed to get back on the market, if I could qualify for them. The answer is right now, probably. Actually, no, I think I I'm just over the edge now. But I guess it varies. But so what would be an example? Like, where would I find these? Are they in downtown Silver Spring? Are they elsewhere? Like, where are the MPDUs?
So I love the way you asked that question because
I'm clueless.
No. That's how they're designed.
Okay.
You're not supposed to know where they are because they're everywhere. So by law, any new development, housing development, is supposed to include at least 12.5% of affordable housing. So they're integrated, and that was one of the beautiful aspects of our system, that we require developers to build affordable housing, but we integrate them so you have that socioeconomic, racial diversity in all parts of the county. Now, there have been instances where developers have been able to get out of them. Most of that has been rectified, and now we're at the point where there's such a need. Some people are advocating for more requirements as well on the developers. But the point is that these are everywhere. And if you walk around parts of downtown Silver Spring or even Wheaton, you might not recognize that some buildings have 12.5% affordable housing, some buildings have 20%, some buildings have 50%. You wouldn't know it. But that's because these programs are very complex. Affordable housing isn't just built out of nowhere. It takes tax credits. It takes public investment. Nowadays, it takes land because our downtown areas are so built up, and the county itself is so built up, there's not a whole lot of land. So the county needs to continue being creative as to where and how we build affordable housing. And so for everyone who talks about the need for more affordable housing, the question is, how do you pay for it and where do you build it? And because of my work with Montgomery Housing Partnership, I know the answer to both is being creative. We need the money in the budget. We need more money in the budget, but we need to continue being creative in how we do it. And there's a host of ways we can do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's good to hear that they're not all isolated and separate buildings. And but I want to know your opinion as it stands now, the MPDU requirements and how well they're adhered to. How well do you think this whole program is working at addressing the problem of the missing middle, so to speak?
Yeah, and that is the other aspect. So the affordable housing is meant for individuals that make approximately 30 to 60% of the area median income, a little lower as well. But what that means is there is the missing middle, and that's the term. So it's essentially workforce housing. And some of the things that I would like to do is encourage more workforce housing for personnel who work here in the county. When we have teachers who cannot afford to live in the county where they teach, when we have firefighters and police officers who can't afford to be in the communities that they keep safe, that's a problem. And I think we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the people who are helping create a vibrant, safe, and loving community to allow them to live in our neighborhoods as well. That said, there's a lot of individuals who can't afford even that. And so we need to keep working hard. And quite frankly, I'm troubled by the news out of Washington.
Who isn't?
Right, and what the Department of Housing and Urban Development will do with some of the tax credits, how that money will flow down. Because
you don't trust Ben Carson to figure this
I
out?
trust Ben Carson to pick out the best office furniture because he does that well, or his wife does that well. So
Jesus
he say.
does that well. He listens to, yeah.
But yes, I do not trust him to be able to provide the resources for our community and other communities to provide housing for those who can least afford it. And at the end of the day, there are certain things that I think government should do. At the very least, we need to help house people and keep them healthy. A lot of other things we need to do as well, but at its fundamental, we need to do those two things.
No, this is such a good point about this program, because I get in a lot of arguments with strong fiscal conservatives, fiscal libertarians about, if you can't afford the market rate, then move somewhere else. And people in Montgomery County love to speak of diversity, but as I had said, there are all different kinds of diversity besides our immutable characteristics. The diversity of profession. I mean, does everyone in Silver Spring, Bethesda, Chevy Chase have to be a lawyer, a lobbyist, a corporate executive, a high up government official, or can we have teachers and firefighters and small business owners or recent graduates? Can we have this diversity of age and
Right.
profession, or does it have to be all rich people who can keep up with the market rate?
Well, even when you break it down, I was referring to the Nighttime Economy Task Force, and I was the lead on the neighborhoods committee, and we were looking at how to keep housing affordable, and fascinating conversations about that. And if you want to attract younger people, did you know that when you build a high-rise, to build one single parking space in that building, usually underground, or at least it's more expensive if it's underground, but even in an elevated garage, it costs between $30,000 to $50,000 for one parking space. And so if you're in a downtown area where people might not need cars or choose to live car-free, and they don't have that parking space, well, you've just taken $30,000 to $50,000 off the cost of that apartment or condo or whatever type of housing it might be. And that's one way to help make things affordable. And certainly, some of the downtown areas, we want to encourage walkability and multimodal transit. Not everyone will go carless, so they need cars. But when you think creatively and you look at the big picture, there are a lot of ways to make things affordable.
Yeah, and certainly, I've lived in a share of group houses. I'm going to get to more about this in a second, but usually there'd be...
I want to hear your
in
group
a
housing
household,
stories.
Sure, in a household, I know it's not financially defined by that, but like if, people live with roommates or a couple living together, usually there's like one car. There's not every single person has a car. When I lived in a house of 7, one person had a car. At one point, 2 people had cars, but certainly not all 7 of us.
Right.
And lots of times, if it's a partner living together, like one of them will have a car. But yeah, it seems like that's the trend. There's ride sharing services, there's bike sharing services. People my age and under love just different, varying modes of transportation.
Right. And municipal government, as I see it, county government, is about making sure that people living here today receive the best services and maintain their great quality of life. But at the same time, you got to plan for the future. Mm-hmm. And you have to plan for, the conversation I believe the county is having and will have to make decisions about in the next 4 to 10 years is autonomous vehicles. And so think about it. So if people are not driving themselves, do you need all these parking spaces? Or how do you accommodate for that? Do you need to widen roads because cars are driving more frequently? Questions I don't have the answers to now, but these are some of the really exciting things that I think we as a local government will be dealing with as part of this technological revolution at hand.
Yeah, that's why local government is important, and that's why I do this. So now, I want to close out by asking you for some general advice, and to as a trigger warning to some hardcore libertarians out there, I'm going to be an entitled millennial for a few seconds. And
libertarians watch this?
At least a few. I share with some friends. I have constructive arguments with fiscal conservatives. With social conservatives, it's less easy to find some common ground. Okay. With true fiscal conservatives, it's just different interpretations of human nature and governance. Anyway, so I'm going to be a bit of an entitled millennial and criticize some things of just the bootstraps forms of capitalism. So I've lived in the DC area for a while. Before that, it was Europe, but that's irrelevant. And I've bounced around from various group house situations, and I'd like to say that I've paid my dues as far as very frugal living. For a while, I lived in what I like to call the slums of Chevy Chase. It was a house in upper northwest DC. It was zoned for 5, but there were 7 of us. It was like all our neighbors had these big fancy houses, but ours was falling down inside. not, there was at any given point there'd be like the dishwasher doesn't work, the washing machine leaks, or the heater broke twice during the polar vortex.
Oh, jeez.
It was 42 degrees inside, but we made it. That's how our like early career professionals made it. There are a couple grad students and a couple people that were just in entry level positions, and we're like, okay, well, this is life in your 20s in a big metro area.
I've been there, done that.
You swallow that pill and you deal with it. That being said, I'm turning 30 this year. Oh my god. And it may be entitled of me to say that it's time to be able to live independently, to not have roommates. And there are many reasons why. I did like most of my roommates through the years. But
that's a different
there's
show.
Something with privacy and dignity and just having your own space and collecting your own. A lot of this furniture I inherited, but to set things up your way and not constantly have to fight over the bathroom, over the stove, and all that. And it seems like something, oh well, I want this, I should have that, but early mid-career salaries do not have that kind of purchasing power. And so that's the issue I have. It's not, oh, I can't afford this nice standard of living and I'm going to complain about it. It's saying, well, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, certainly, an early mid-career position could purchase a modest apartment to yourself where you don't have to be, basically a six-figure salary to live alone. And that's my spiel here, but it's like you have to be rich. You have to make six figures to afford a market rate single bedroom apartment of your own. Or a hardcore libertarian would say, well, suck it up, just live with roommates until you make more. So what I'm asking you is, if a millennial who doesn't make six figures wants to have the dignity
what
and
about
privacy.
A 41-year-old who does not make six figures?
I know, yeah. Well, you're Gen X, but you can be with us.
Okay.
We're
in the under six-figure club.
The under six-figure club. So if you are not rich but want to have the dignity and privacy of independent living, where does one look in Montgomery County?
So that's a big question.
Yeah, sorry for my long spiel, but it's personal.
So first I would say talk to a realtor who will be able to help you find communities that work within your budget. The housing crisis has now put more requirements on what an individual needs to provide in order to secure a loan to buy a house. So there's various steps to get through, but assuming that you get the green light to be able to afford a house or to get a loan, there are places in the county that are very affordable. What I am committed to doing is making sure that every community in Montgomery County works for the various lifestyles. And what I mean by that is making sure that our public transportation infrastructure is such that you can buy an affordable home and still do it maybe on one car for two people or so, or if you want to take public transit, that is not too far from you. You might still have to walk a quarter of a mile or half a mile, which is standard for most public transit systems, but that is something that's safe and reliable there. My husband and I had one car for 10 years, and we only got a second car when I started my campaign for county council at large, because this county is huge and there's no way I could get everywhere just on public transportation, or at least get everywhere on time with public transportation. But if you wanted to move to certain areas and you find something that is affordable, but there is no public transportation there, that's what we need to fix. And we need to make sure that communities have some of the amenities around the county that millennials are looking for. So housing might only be one slice of the pie, because you might be able to afford a lot of Montgomery County, I would argue, but there are other qualities that housing does not provide. Mm-hmm. Probably transportation being the first.
Yeah. I have a car, but there's only so much sitting on 495 or getting to 495 that one can tolerate.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, older generations like to point out, say, oh, we just want it all. We want the nightlife, and we want affordability, and we want transportation. And everyone realizes that there's you have to find your balance somewhere. But when I look at it, when I argue about this, it's like, well, I think of purchasing power and what kind of career and what stage of career would be required to afford a place of your own in the past. And it seems like it's blown out of proportion. Like, why are we having professionals living 5 to a unit? But it's all something to be figured out, and I'm glad that there's an effort at least to come up with creative solutions and not just say, oh, well, the market, and you're screwed. So
all the issues that we deal with here in Montgomery County can easily be passed off as some other problem. And we could easily have a quick debate, pass a bill, and be over it. The structural issues, the ones that get at the heart of a lot of these issues, will take some time to figure out because they're complex. And we didn't even talk about the property tax increase, that we have all these needs and we want to expand education and want to expand our nonprofit sector, and we need more revenue to do that. But on the flip side, increasing the property tax, what if you're a senior? What if you want to age in place and you're on a fixed income? It gets much harder to do. And if you are a young person who wants to move to the county, the house might be affordable, but the taxes might not.
Yeah, my mother's experiencing this issue as a retiree, and it just seems like there's no magic bullet proposal that's going to make everyone happy. And I guess the creative solutions are, a pessimist like me would be like, well, we make the highest proportion of people less unhappy, but you would say, well, the best compromise among everyone.
I tend to be utilitarian in my thinking, the greatest good for the greatest number. As often as one can.
As they piss off the fewest.
Well, that too. Ultimately, I'm involved in politics and I'm running for the county council at large because I want to continue helping people. And there is no silver bullet. And I appreciate hearing from an activist like you that is true. That anyone who makes promises without necessarily a downside to somebody, I don't think is being honest. Which is why my thought process is one of constant listening and constant learning. And then once I'm firm, once I know what my moral compass tells me in the direction we need to go, I will then help make the case and be that leader to help bring more people on board to do what we have to do.
Oh, well, that's valuable. We appreciate that. And I'm flattered to qualify as an activist at this point.
Oh,
I have no idea. But, our time is more or less up to keep these at a reasonable length. But I thank you very much for coming on. I've known you since last summer with everyone else. But
so long.
I tend to ask people to come on the show based on how frequently I interact with them. It's like, oh, I see him all the time. I need to ask him on the show. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll certainly get this up as soon as I can. It won't be April Fool's Day by the time you're all watching, but nothing here was fake news, I don't think. So keep watching,
thank you.
Keep reading the blog, and follow Evan Glass on Twitter. You got Facebook, everything.
Evan M. Glass.
All right, and primary June 26th.
June 26th.